You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Bucs and Bears fans, to this week's crossover Thursday episode of the Locked On Bucs and the Locked On Bears podcast. Thank you for making your favorite Locked On podcast your first listen every day. I'm David Harrison, co-host of the Locked On Bucs podcast on Twitter at dharrison82, and I'm spending this Thursday with the host of the Locked On Bears podcast, Lauren Cox, on Twitter at CoxSports1. Lauren, the Bears are visiting the Sunshine State. Justin Fields versus Tom Brady, volume one of many, I'm sure, to come. A newish, right, play caller there in Chicago for the offense. It's a 4:25 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. What's the biggest storyline, do you think, facing the Chicago Bears as they enter this Week 7 matchup?
It's all about that offense and obviously the continued development of Justin Fields, but really the development of the offensive identity as a whole. It's felt like they've made progress in, defining themselves by a running game, getting extra heavy personnel on the field, tight ends, an extra offensive lineman, and trying to sort of build then play action off of that. But it hasn't necessarily equated to as many points as they'd like to see. And so the thing Matt Nagy's talked about is trying to get more explosive plays, particularly off of play action passes. They can get their 4 or 5 yards of carry in the ground game. And, Fields can run those little, quick curls or slants and little things to get into a rhythm, but they want more of the bigger plays downfield. And that's something he did really well at Ohio State. We've seen flashes of it from him in his Bears career, but like last week against the Packers, he had a really nice touchdown drive in the first quarter, the opening drive, 80 yards, some beautiful throws in that one. Then things kind of fell flat for the second and third quarters and for most of the game. And then in the fourth quarter, for whatever reason, he was able to turn it on and kind of drive down again and rekindle some of that same feeling. But it's about being able to consistently do that for 4 quarters. And I think they want to build more explosive plays off of that and be able to put up enough points on the board to give their defense a little bit of a break. It's been playing well. It's not as dominant as it once was, but the defense has been good enough to win games as soon as their offense can kind of get up to a certain level with it. But Buccaneers, obviously, a little bit of a different story.
Yeah, and I mean, I watched that Bears-Packers game. It was actually kind of a benefit for me. As my viewers and my listeners know, I also cover the Washington football team. Just did a crossover episode with Peter Bukowski of the Locked On Packers. Usually I have to watch 2 games to prepare for these crossovers at a minimum. This time I only had to watch 1 Week 6 games because both the opponents were right there. Although it was a little tricky watching both sides of the ball, thinking about how they stack up to 2 different teams. It was a very interesting subject, but getting to development of Justin Fields, right? And I know Coach Nagy's caught a lot of flack in the past, especially with Mitch Trubisky, and maybe not really developing the right offense for a quarterback like Mitch was. And then Justin Fields not doing all too hot in the beginning. Now they have a new play caller. I don't imagine the offense has gone through complete wholesale changes, but a different play caller does bring a little bit of a different vibe. What I liked from watching the Bears against the Packers was the amount they let Justin kind of move around, the amount they kind of designed some rollouts for him, move the pocket for him, kind of use those legs to his benefit. Do you think is that a new development under the new play caller, or is that something you've been seeing throughout the entire time that Fields has been on the field, or is it and he's just getting more comfortable?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's definitely been emphasized with Bill Lazor calling the plays instead of Matt Nagy, but I also think some of it has been Justin Fields getting more comfortable too. So, in his first start, even Matt Nagy said this week that they put too much on his plate. They kind of opened
Yeah.
things up against the Browns and said, "All right, Justin, let's kind of see what you can do," and realized that they needed to definitely scale that back a little bit more for a rookie in his first career NFL start. So, I think from there he's gotten more comfortable in the progressions and the play calling and knowing his receivers in and out and how fast they are and how much zip he has to put on balls to Allen Robinson versus Darnell Mooney and different guys in different tempos of this offense to where he can then kind of bring his legs into that equation and know when he gets outside of the pocket where guys are going to go. And last week against the Packers, we saw him throw an interception and a near interception on plays that kind of broke down. And one of them was a weird play that was supposed to be the defense jumped off sides, but they never threw the flag. So he thought he had a 3 play, but he and Robinson were still on different pages. And later in the game, same kind of thing. It's just those little aspects are where you still are rough around the edges with this offense, but it does seem like the new play caller has built more of a rhythm around it. It's felt like the plays kind of stack into each other or build into each other a little bit more than it was with Nagy, where with Nagy, sometimes it just felt like he was picking plays here and there. But with Glazer, it feels like, the running game directly leads into play action that actually looks like the running plays, not just play action that's a token fake and shotgun or something like that. There seems to be more of a flow and a feel to it that's helping Fields with his development, but clearly it's not equating into high scoring offense just yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, on those two plays, it really, the first one more so than the second one, didn't really look like to me like two bad decisions or a bad quarterback decision, more so just two players on, like you said, different pages. I mean, Allen Robinson, if he's reading the same thing that Justin is, that they've got a free play, take a shot. I think, from what I remember seeing, he's actually got position on his defender. And if that ball is out there at the right spot, then he can actually go out there, maybe make a play on that pass. And yeah, Justin was obviously very confused that there wasn't a flag on that play, which I think everybody. I mean, I know the broadcasters were. I'm sure you were. I was watching the game, and after it actually happened, I'm sitting there going, "Yeah, there should have been a flag thrown. That should have been a free play for him." But then you also have the play, and I know Peter Bukowski, again, Locked On Packers host, praised that throw specifically. He dropped it on the sideline, right between two defenders, perfect spot, sets up his receiver, and then Allen Robinson makes a great play on the sideline. So you certainly see those flashes of Justin Fields being able to be an effective quarterback. And coming into this game, Lauren, he's going to be facing a defense that, quite honestly, is decimated with injuries. I mean, they've still got a lot of great players over on that side of the ball: Shaq Barrett, Vita Vea, Ndamukong Suh, Devin White, and those guys. But that secondary, especially Levante David, potentially going to be out again. It looks like Antoine Winfield Jr. is probably going to be playing for this game for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But this defense has still been able to do enough. Granted, not playing the cream of the crop, not playing the Aaron Rodgers, the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens of the NFL. They've had kind of their luck where, even though they're losing all these players, which doesn't sound lucky, obviously, they're doing it kind of at the right time in their schedule when the Jalen Hurts of the world are coming into the game. And again, no offense to Jalen Hurts or Justin Fields, two young guys, a lot of development left to do or to go for them. So when they've got some veteran pieces on the defense and Todd Bowles, who knows how to leverage the chess pieces he has in the best way, then they've been able to be successful enough to help the Buccaneers get some wins. What is the sense you have with this new flavor of play calling going on there in Chicago? Justin Fields and his development going up against a Buccaneers defense that week after week, opponents come into and kind of say, "Oh, look, they got a lot of injuries. Maybe we can put some points up on them." But then week after week, they're not putting up the 30 and 40 burgers, and maybe some of the fans think they should be able to. They're still leaving a little bit frustrated.
Yeah, it's funny because that was the storyline last week against the Packers, is that they
Yeah,
they were missing like 2 or 3 of their top 3 cornerbacks, and I think another one got hurt during the game, so they were on
right.
all backups there, and then one of their starting safeties got hurt too, so it was really an entirely banged up Packers secondary, and we were sitting here thinking, well, the Bears should, on paper, in theory, be able to pass against these guys and put up more of these points, and it felt like there were too many plays where, Fields has time, or he buys time with his legs, and he's looking downfield, and no one's getting open against backup cornerbacks. And
Mhm.
and so I'm not necessarily more confident than that coming into this game against another banged up secondary, that all of a sudden it's going to be different than it was against Green Bay's backups versus Tampa Bay's backups. So plus you add in how well the Buccaneers have been able to defend the run this season. Some of that I think has been just game situation, that when the Buccaneers have a lead, the opponent's not running as much because they're playing from behind a little bit. But still, the Bears really, really, really want to run the ball. I mean, that's really what they're going to want to try and hang their hat on in this game. And as much as Fields is capable of making some of those impressive throws, he's not at the stage of his career yet to really fully carry this offense. So I don't know. I'm expecting more baby steps forward from Fields, but I'm not expecting a high scoring shootout, from at least from Chicago's side at this point.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of look at the two sides, right? The Chicago Bears offense seems a little bit limited just because of what they have on the shelves there in their offense and some of the limitations there. While the Buccaneers defense certainly seems to have all the parts they want and able to do a lot of things, even with some of the injuries that they've been suffering. And speaking of parts and having what you need, Lauren, of course, our friends over at rockauto.com have everything that our viewers and our listeners could possibly need when they're trying to work on their car, because with the ever increasing numbers of makes and models of vehicles out there on the market, it is literally impossible for your local chain store or your dealership to hold all the parts you're going to want. You're going to go to the desk, you're going to talk to the clerk, they're going to offer you the parts that they happen to have in their warehouse. And honestly, you're going to spend 30, 50, even 100% more at some of those chain stores than you would at rockauto.com. And if you've got a computer or access to a computer, then you have access to rockauto.com at your home, in your office, in your pocket. It's a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and they have everything you could ever need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, and even new carpet. So go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, right locked in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so you know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
All right, welcome back into this crossover Thursday. Lauren Cox, Locked On Bears, alongside David Harrison from Locked On Buccaneers. I think we can already get a little bit of a sense here that this is, I mean, I think every Bears fan is ready to admit this is a fairly one-sided matchup, at least on paper, right? The Buccaneers come in as clearly the better team. Doesn't mean the Bears have zero chance, but I think we all sort of have a feeling about generally where the dynamics lie in this game. But David, I'm curious for you, when you look back at, first of all, the loss to the Rams, but also, the Cowboys game, keeping things close, and also the Patriots kind of surprisingly keeping things close against the Buccaneers. What's worked against them? What's been the difference in those games, even the ones they lost, or even the ones they won, that made it more of a challenge than some of the easier wins?
Yeah, so for the Rams and the Patriots, really it was smart defense, aggressive defense, and being able to execute and contain things that the Buccaneers were trying to do. You go back to that Rams game, they really came out looking to kick the doors down, blast the windows, and just tear down the entire building that the Buccaneers had possibly tried to build up for that game, and they were fairly successful in doing so. And it really kind of looked like they took the Buccaneers a little off guard. I think maybe the Bucs thought they were coming in for kind of your run in the mill, highly touted regular season game, and the Rams basically came in there looking to say, look, we're going to be big brother this year. We're going to be the Super Bowl favorites. You guys had your chance. Now it's our turn. So two kind of completely different mentalities, but they did it with defense first. And then they let their offense kind of build and get into a rhythm, because a lot of people forget Matthew Stafford started 1 for 6 in that game. So it took a little bit for the Rams offense to kind of catch up and get the nerves settled from all that intensity, but the defense did enough. And then in New England, weather had a little bit to do with it, but really you don't want to take any credit away from the Pats defense, because they came in with essentially a bend don't break mentality, forced the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to settle for a lot of field goals after they got into the red zone. And it really kind of worked out in allowing them the opportunity to get enough offense to be competitive. And honestly, you could say they could have come away with a win in that game if Nick Folk makes that long field goal. It's a long field goal, so you don't want to hate on him too much, but the Patriots absolutely could have, in another dimension, come out with a victory in that game. The Dallas Cowboys is a little bit of a one off, because I feel like that game was it was definitely about the Dallas Cowboys offense, the quick hitters, the fast passes, not letting the pass rush get home with a little bit of a banged up offensive line, using speed to their benefit. And that definitely is something we've seen copied moving forward with other opponents. But I think the Buccaneers themselves were a little discombobulated just as a team. They had the early injury, Sean Murphy Bunting. You come in with a high emotion of celebrating the Super Bowl. There's just a lot of things working against them. And then the offense, quite honestly, didn't look completely in tune. Tom Brady kind of looked like an early season, 40-plus-year-old quarterback. If Tom Brady was ever going to look like one, has only gotten better since then, and that's what the Bears are going to be facing. But I think still, if you're looking to protect Justin Fields against this pass rush, which for all the injuries the defense has, their pass rush is still fairly healthy. Jason Pierre-Paul on the practice field on Wednesday. We're not sure if he's actually going to play, but even when he hasn't, the rookie Joe Tryon-Shoyinka has looked really good, and he's also developing at a pretty rapid pace himself. Shaquille Barrett coming off a multi-sack game. So, I mean, there's just a lot of things that this defense can still do to a young quarterback. Speed is going to be their friend. Try to get the run game going. You got to try to get the run game going, even if it's just keep the Bucs offense. You got to try, but then screens, quick passes, even those jet sweeps that count as passes and all those things. You try to do those things against them, but eventually you are going to have to try to stretch that defense out. Fortunately for the Bears, I think they have two receivers in Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney, one of my favorite guys, that potentially could match up well against this Buccaneers depleted secondary.
Yeah, I was curious because you mentioned the defenses of both the Rams and the Patriots there, which understandably they're both good defenses. But when I look at this Bears matchup, I mean, first of all, you got Robert Quinn on the COVID-19 list right now, and I mean that's as good of a mystery to me as you, as far as whether or not he's going to play. I would presume
Right.
probably. I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't know what to presume. Probably yes or
Yeah,
no.
it's hard.
It's impossible to know at this point as we're recording this on Wednesday night. So TBD if they're going to be limited in the pass rush, but then in the secondary, Bears fans love Jalen Johnson. He's been playing really, really
Mhm.
well now in his second season, kind of growing into that number one cornerback, not full on like shut down Revis Island, but definitely playing very, very well on that side. But then you got some real question marks with Kindle Vildor as your other starter, and they've been kind of doing some different things at the slot position.
Mhm.
They've been going lately. The last couple weeks, it's been they've just brought in a third safety and kind of done this like heavier nickel package with DeAndre Houston Carson kind of playing the slot some of the time, and then they brought in Xavier Crawford, a former undrafted free agent. He usurped a former 6th-round pick, and now they added former Lions 2nd-round pick Tease Tabor back from the practice
Mhm.
squad because they've got another safety that's injured on their bench. So we don't know what the slot's even going to look like. And when I think about that Buccaneers offense with Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, and Mike Evans, I I
Yeah.
worry a little bit with how this secondary is going to match up, especially when it seems like that's been some of the formula for stopping Tom Brady in this offense, or at least for the Rams or the Patriots to be able to keep those, for the Rams to beat them and the Patriots to keep that game close. I, does it come down to, I mean, those matchups in terms of slowing down the Patriots off, or it's the Patriots offense, Tom Brady's offense? Does it come down to the one-on-one matchups there, or was it the pass rush getting home, or how were some of those defenses able to take it away? And did the Bears stand a chance of doing that with the secondary and maybe the lack of Robert Quinn in the pass rush?
Yeah, I mean, the lack of Robert Quinn is going to be a big one, especially. I mean, because Donovan Smith, don't get me wrong, Donovan Smith has been having probably his best year in 2021 of his entire career, but that left tackle is still considered probably the weakest spot on the offensive line. Obviously, you have Alex Kappa at right guard, who could probably be the lowest rated offensive lineman for the unit, but he's on the interior, so he's always going to have a little bit of help there. But Donovan Smith, if you can get him isolated, especially with a guy like Robert Quinn, that's where you could really see some problems come in for that Buccaneers offense. But even if Robert Quinn is on the field, I think when you look at the Rams and the aggression and the pass rush and the trying to get home and just playing physical branded defense, and you look at the Patriots and kind of playing a little bit off, understanding you're going to give up a lot of yards, you're going to give up a lot of first downs, but really it's about focusing in on holding them to field goals. What the lesson there, I think, is play the team the way that you best play defense, right? So for the Chicago Bears, you want to try to get that pass rush home. You want to try to be aggressive, but you want to do it with 4, maybe 5 guys at the most to give your secondary some help. Like you said, play Johnson on who you view as the biggest threat. I mean, I think Antonio Brown is probably the biggest home run threat, but I think I put my best corner on Chris Godwin just because by himself, he's probably the most versatile of the 3. Whereas Antonio Brown, you probably put bracketing coverage on him using 2 guys, and then Mike Evans, you try to body up and hope that you can at least minimize the yards after reception when he does get the catch. And then you still have plenty of other weapons. OJ Howard is having a resurgence, Leonard Fournette, all those things. But I think if you try to play outside of who you are as a defense, you're just playing into the hands of Tom Brady because Tom Brady already knows what you do best. When you go away from what you do best, you're just taking care of part of his problem for him. And then he's going to come out there and now you're off balance, you're uncomfortable, and he's just going to make you even more uncomfortable, looking to press you where you're already playing out of balance. So for the Chicago Bears, Khalil Mack trying to get home, I think that's obviously the best bet in trying to live with that pass rush as best you can, minimize the run game as much you can. And I mean, they did a good job against Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers for I'd say the first half of the game. It's just that offense couldn't get enough points on the board. And that's where I think teams like Chicago, they remind me a lot of Washington football team in the sense that they have enough defense from time to time to keep them in it, but the offense just kind of can't get things going. Then eventually that dam is going to break. And that's what I worry about here in this matchup. And what I wanted to ask you about, Lauren, actually. So looking at this offensive line again, guys like Donovan Smith have been playing better than usual. Ryan Jensen has been a little bit banged up at center here recently. Tristan Wirfs, I mean, some might call me biased, but the best second-year tackle that I think we've seen enter the NFL in a really long time, still looking extremely dominant there on that side. How do you want the Chicago Bears? Do you like what I said? You want them to kind of stay true to their mentality, or do you think that they need to switch some things up in this matchup to protect for those receivers and Tom Brady?
Yeah, let's not forget last year when Khalil Mack sort of flipped Tristan Wirfs there, sort of
Mm,
famously on that one
we don't
pass.
remember that.
I imagine he'll be looking to do something similar
Yeah.
again. I'm definitely concerned about the lack of Robert Quinn because it feels like
Mhm.
that's so much of what was lingering this Bears defense last year was that like Quinn was out there, but it wasn't the same. They're missing that true complement to Khalil Mack because Akeem Hicks was hurt and Akeem Hicks is still kind of hurt and been in and out of the lineup, and occasionally he'll still flash a play here or there, but he's clearly not 100%. And so you're getting some level of Akeem Hicks, but it's not full strength Akeem Hicks. Same kind of thing with Eddie Goldman. He's been hurt and kind of back and forth. So like, there's not a lot that they're really able to hang their head on besides Mack and Quinn. I mean, the other guys have done enough. Mario Edwards Jr. has been just a high motor, high energy guy for them on the interior, but it's been a little quieter from, like Bilal Nichols and Angelo Blackson and some of the other guys. So if they're just down to just Khalil Mack, it really limits some of what they want to do, because it's very much a defense that plays as much two deep safety as possible. Sometimes they'll show one and rotate back, and occasionally they'll show two and rotate down to one, but they want that deep shell and try and take away the big game and force Tom Brady and whoever they're playing to really check it down short. You can get your 3-yard completions all game if you want, but we're going to try and force you to do that 12 times to move down the field for a touchdown, and bet that more often than not, most teams aren't able to consistently dink and dunk their way all the way down the field without having some kind of mistake, penalty, turnover, whatever it might be over the course of a game. The problem is Tom Brady is one of those quarterbacks that isn't going to make those mistakes. I mean, he excels at that accuracy, at that precision, at that timing. I mean, obviously it works downfield just as well, but this is not, I don't know, there's not a formula, right, to beat Tom Brady. We've seen in the Super Bowl that you get home, get pressure with 4 and then pray on the back end is kind of what I think the Bears plan has to be. It's just going to be a lot harder to get pressure with 4 if Robert Quinn is still on that COVID-19 list. I believe he's vaccinated, so I think there's a chance that
easier path
to have 2 positive or 2 negative tests in a row, and I don't know what the whole protocol is. So it's not a foregone conclusion that he's for sure going to be out, but it certainly is going to have a big impact, because the depth at outside linebacker is, there's some young guys with some upside, but it's not anything that's going to be not anything you want to throw out there against Tom Brady. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how that matchup sort of goes back and forth, because I think both of these sides are going to be quite much decided in the trenches with how much time they can give Justin Fields and how much the Bears running game can get through, and then mainly how much the pass rush can get home on Tom Brady. And I think that's really going to be where it's decided in this spread. At BetOnline.ag right now, it is Bears plus 13. And so, expecting that sort of 2 touchdown deficit there, that feels about right as we look at some of the other Buccaneers scores. I mean, obviously they've had a couple of games with some pretty big blowouts. The Eagles kept it fairly close at the end there, and the Patriots and Cowboys did too. So I don't know, maybe Bears fans might like that plus 13 to at least keep it a little bit closer. Otherwise, the Bears money line is plus 535. The over under set at 47. Seems a little bit high for how Bears games have been scoring so far, but the Buccaneers have been putting up a lot of points. So maybe there's some potential here for a little bit of a back and forth there. If you want to lay some money down on this game and win big, betonline.ag is the place to do it. It's the number one place we recommend for all of your sports betting needs. Sign up today for a free account and enter our promo code Locked On to receive your free welcome bonus on your first deposit, giving you even more money to play with at betonline.ag, where the game starts.
All right, coming back in here now to finish out this crossover Thursday episode featuring the Chicago Bears and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. David Harrison and Lauren Cox, host of those representative teams and their shows. Speaking of those odds, Lauren, from BetOnline, like you said, Buccaneers favored by 13 in this game. The over-under is at 47.5. I'm a huge avid user of BetOnline.ag. I bet on literally every football game every single week. The Browns Broncos Thursday night game is giving me fits right now because every instinct in me says Browns, but with everything going on over there, Baker Mayfield not starting the game, at least I don't even know if he'll dress, Nick Chubb being out, like everything also leans Broncos, but that's for a different show for a different time. But yeah, Buccaneers by 13, over under 47.5. I want to ask you your actual, final game prediction for the show, as much as you can have it here midweek. But before we get to the score lines, would you take those points if you're betting Bears, or if you're recommending to a Bears listener to bet Bears Bucks? Would you take those 13 points, or do you think the Buccaneers will exceed that window?
13 is a lot. Like
No.
I do not think the Bears in any way are going to pull off the upset. It's not at that, but 13 feels like a lot. When I look at some of the teams they've beat up on, the Falcons and the Dolphins in particular, I feel like the Bears are a better team than the Dolphins, certainly. And some of the Falcons' inconsistency there, I think they had a lot of turnovers in that game and made things a little bit inflated in that regard. But at the same time, I don't have a lot of confidence in this Bears offense to put up a ton of points. And I do think the Buccaneers are going to be able to score a decent amount, but I really have trouble with a 13-point spread. I can see it happening. That's why I'm hesitation here, because I could easily see the Buccaneers win by 14, 17, even 20, but there's enough parity in the NFL, and I think these teams have played close enough in the past that I'm I'm leaning Bears plus 13, but I don't think it's going to be by a lot more. Not a lot less. Like I'm thinking 10 is kind of the number, or 10 or 11. Kind of in that range is where I find myself coming back to.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. And if I'm betting the money line on this, or if I'm betting the money line, I'm taking the Bucks. If I'm betting against the spread, I'm actually going to take the Bears with the points on this. So I haven't decided which one I'm going to put the money on. I will, like I said, I will bet this game. It's just sometimes I go money line if I find myself overthinking the spread a little bit too much. But yeah, I mean, 13 points is a lot of points in the NFL. I don't care who the opponent is. And the Buccaneers too. Something for those people out there who like to put money on these types of things need to realize is the Buccaneers been running the ball a lot more than they usually do with since the arrival of Tom Brady. Part of that is the emergence of Leonard Fournette as kind of that RB1, and he's been doing really well on the ground and doing some good work for the team in the short yardage passing game as well. But also part of that you have to believe is to keep that defense off the field as much as possible. Lauren, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have lost a starter to injury every single week this season. So they need
Wow.
to snap that streak. Yeah. And most of them have come on defense. I mean, Rob Gronkowski on offense, but most of those injuries have come on defense. So the longer you can keep this offense on the field, the better off you're going to be because one, you control the clock. Justin Fields can't score if he's not on the field. He can't get comfortable if he's not on the field either. So that kind of always helps you. But plus, you want to keep that depleted defense, that very banged up defense off the field as well, because it's very, very hard. I'm not gonna say it's impossible, but it's very hard to get injured when you're on the sideline. So that kind of plays into this a little bit too. If they get a 10-point lead or a 14, 17-point lead, they could go very run heavy. And then if the Bears come in with a late touchdown or a late field goal or something, that kind of gets you under that spread. Speaking of betting lines, over under 47 and a half points. So like 24 to 24, and you go over 24 is not a lot in today's NFL. But depending on how much you think the Bears can put up here, do you take the over or the under at 47 and a half?
It's hard for me to envision this Bears offense putting up more than, you know, uh, 21 points would be a lot, I think, for me in this game. And so then it becomes a matter of, okay, like how much do I think the Buccaneers can put up? Like I'm putting the Bears more in this like 14 to 17 to maybe 20-point range. So then the reverse math and that would put the Buccaneers anywhere from 27 to 35 points to stay in that under range. I'm still feeling under because I do think the Buccaneers are going to want to run the ball more, and if they can get an early lead, they'll go to running the ball. And I think the Bears, first of all, are going to want to run the ball anyway and try and keep Tom Brady off on the sidelines, like we were just kind of talking about. But so I find myself leaning under just because these Bears games have all kind of been lower scoring games, even for both opponents, with the exception of the Rams game in week one, where the Bears had some really massive like coverage busts in the secondary that led to like two really easy Rams touchdowns that inflated things a little bit more than they should. Seems like week one for everybody was weird this
Right.
season. But since then, everything's been a little bit more under control. The defense has played well enough to keep things. I mean, they still lost by 20 to the Browns, but that kind of blew up in the fourth quarter by the end. And so
Mhm.
I'm definitely still leaning under, even though it's not a slight in any way, shape, or form against this Buccaneers defense. I just don't. I think part of it is that, or this Buccaneers offense, but it's just I don't think the Bears can keep up enough points to keep that an over. And then I think the Bears defense will do enough, and the Buccaneers won't be as interested in running up the score as much if they get to that early lead and can kind of just slow things down. It's not going to be that back and forth shootout necessarily where each team is matching each other and just trying to score more and more. I think
Yeah.
they can kind of get some Fournette going in that third quarter and in the second half in particular and slow things down a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if I were advising somebody on where to put their money this weekend, I would probably tell them just to avoid that over under line altogether because we have seen flashes from that Chicago Bears offense. We've seen some flashes from Justin Fields again. I mean, if Allen Robinson and Justin Fields are on the same page, that could be a touchdown, and that's an entirely different game at that point in time against the Packers. So they're kind of like on the verge. You feel like, but then again, it's just going to be that click in moment. Is that going to happen week 7? Who knows? It could happen week 14. We have no idea when that's going to happen or how close they are. But when it happens, I think it'll be good
And it
for the
did happen.
Bears.
It happened last year against the Buccaneers, weirdly
Yeah,
enough, right? I mean,
they
the
did
Bears
have a very good game. Yeah.
they won that game, and I don't think any of us were really expecting it. I mean, I can know the Bears
Mhm.
were, I think, 3-1 at that time, but they had just switched to Nick Foles, and it was kind of
Right.
like, I mean, it's Nick Foles versus Tom Brady. It's what I mean? Like we didn't think the Buccaneers were as good as they ended up being either, but
Yep.
it for some reason that game worked out well for the Bears. So maybe there's something there to the matchups or the coaching, the schemes, and how well they know each other and how these things go together. But that one was also a little bit more low scoring too. I think 20-19 was the final in that
Yeah.
one. So
Not
who
a lot of
knows?
points put up. Yeah, definitely. And I'll tell you right now, Buccaneers fans, as long as Vita Vea gets out of this game, healthy, then Buccaneers fans will be happy. If I had to, like if someone was like, I'm putting money on this game, Dave, no matter what you say, I'm putting money on this game, I would probably recommend the under, but my prediction is going to go against that. So my prediction, Lauren, I'll kick it off for us here. I'm going 31-21 Buccaneers,
Nice.
which is 52 points total. So obviously that's over, right? So why would I recommend the under? Well, I'm kind of I'm calling myself out a bit, acknowledging that I do think the Chicago Bears offense is close to finding a little bit of a rhythm and being better than what they've been. And call me an idealist, call me a dreamer, whatever you want to call me. I like Justin Fields. I'm an Ohio State guy anyway, so maybe there's a little bias there, but I like what I see in the arm talent. Again, that pass that he dropped into Allen Robinson between two Packers defenders. Look, I don't care who the safety and cornerback are in that pass. Nobody's defending that pass. Those are the kinds of things. And again, there's the little miscommunications that led to that first interception, maybe that even that second one. If they can clean up some of those miscommunications, and this Buccaneers secondary is a little depleted, we'll have to see what the status of Antoine Winfield Jr. is moving forward. That would have a big impact as well, I think. I have a little bit more confidence in this Bears offense to possibly put this thing together. People tend to rise when they play the Buccaneers. It's the defending Super Bowl champion curse. Everybody brings their A game. If the Bears bring their A game, I could definitely see 21 points, which I like because you mentioned 21 points would be a good solid outing for them as well.
Yeah, you said the score that I had exactly in my head too. 31-21 was where I was feeling, which again, I'm in the same boat. It's like I still lean the under if I'm really, if I'm
Right.
gonna put money in that spot in particular, but it does feel like it's enough progress in this Bears offense that they'll figure out something a little bit more than last week. And I'm thinking, it'll be like 31-7 for a little while. Maybe the Bears get a late touchdown or two, or kind of a backdoor cover
Yeah.
type thing later in this game. I don't think it's gonna be Bears pull out to a 14-0 lead and then the Buccaneers climb back or anything like that. But I think the Bears will start out strong. I think they'll have a little bit of a lull in the middle somewhere, and maybe that 2-minute drive ends with a touchdown instead of an interception in the end zone, and that's where you kind of change things up compared to last week to this week. But it'll just be like incrementally better than the previous game, but not better enough to beat a team as good as the Buccaneers and Tom Brady. And I really agree with you that whole sort of rising to the opponent. I mean, not that the Bears weren't rising to play the Packers, big rivalry game, but
Right.
I think there's something about the Super Bowl champions too that they're going to be amped up for quite a bit. And I think some of those vulnerabilities in Tampa Bay secondary, I think the Bears will look at last week against the Packers and say, you know what, we should have been better against an injured secondary. Now we have another shot against an injured secondary for these wide receivers to kind of step up and prove it. And they were missing their wide receivers coach last week because of a COVID-19 list spot for him too. So if he's back, maybe they'll have a little bit more juice. And maybe it's former Lions wide receiver Mike Furry. He's definitely kind of the energetic cheerleader on the sideline. So maybe he can get them going a little bit better against this banged up secondary compared to the one last week.
Yeah, and of course, I've got the dreaded curse of fantasy football, where I've got Darnell Mooney on my fantasy football lineup this weekend, and obviously they're playing the Bucks, who I have their defense. So hopefully they do enough to each other. I don't know, maybe 2 interceptions for the Bucks defense, 2 touchdowns for Darnell Mooney, kind of balance some things out. Let me get a win here in Week 7. But that's going to do it, Lauren, for us here on this crossover Thursday. Thank you again to all of you out there watching. Thank you again to all of you out there listening for making your favorite Locked On podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen of the day, let's recommend to you Peacock and Williamson, the NFL show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and it's available on all platforms, just like the Locked On Bears and the Locked On Bucks. Lauren and I will be back to end this week, give our final thoughts ahead of this Bears and Buccaneers matchup in Week 7. Again, kicking off on Sunday at 4:25 p.m. Eastern Time. Until we see you again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and thank you for joining Crossover Thursday, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.